them all what I'm made up. Strut down the hall, won't stop till I get enough.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something that really made waves online recently. It involves British actor John Cleese, former White House aide Stephen Miller, and, well, a pretty fundamental legal concept, habeas corpus.
Exactly. It all started with a reaction, a pretty strong one, from Cleese to comments Miller made. We've got the reports on Cleese's post, Miller's statements, and importantly, some legal context to help us, unpack what's really going on here.
Right. Our mission today is to get past the sort of immediate reactions and understand habeas corpus itself, why it matters so much.
And also look at the different angles presented here. There's this tension, isn't there, between, say, national security arguments and these core constitutional rights.
Definitely. Okay, so let's get straight to it. John Cleese's post on X, which is now apparently removed, what did it actually say?
Well, reports state Cleese was responding directly to Miller, talking about potentially suspending habeas corpus for migrants.
And the quote was pretty pointed.
It certainly was. According to reports, he wrote something like, "I see Stephen Miller says he is actively thinking about suspending habeas corpus. As this has been the keystone of the rule of law for centuries, I'd like to suggest that we actively think about suspending Stephen Miller." And then he added, preferably by the neck, which, is very sharp Cleese wit, but obviously quite provocative.
Very provocative. And as you said, that post isn't up anymore. But it definitely shows the strength of feeling around Miller's original comments. So what did Miller say?
Okay, so Miller, who was a key architect of Trump's immigration policies, reportedly suggested suspending habeas corpus for migrants.
And his justification.
He apparently told reporters something to the effect of, "The Constitution is clear, that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion." He then argued, "The border crisis is a form of invasion, and that gives us legal grounds
to pursue every possible remedy." Right, I saw that quote too. So he's framing the border situation as an invasion to potentially trigger that constitutional exception.
That seems to be the crux of his argument, yes. And it's worth noting, the reports also mention the Trump administration is actively exploring legal means for this.
Okay, so before we go further, let's make sure everyone listening really gets what habeas corpus is. It sounds technical, but it's fundamental.
It really is. At its core, it's your right, if you're imprisoned, to be brought before a court so a judge can determine if your detention is actually lawful. Simple as that, really.
It prevents people from just being locked up indefinitely without any legal basis. The sources we looked at call it a keystone of the rule of law for centuries. It's pretty significant language.
Absolutely. It goes way back, English common law, and it's protected right there in the U.S. Constitution. It's seen as a bedrock principle against arbitrary government power.
And critically, this isn't just for citizens, right?
That's a key point. Decades of court rulings have consistently affirmed that habeas corpus protections extend to non-citizens who are physically present in the U.S.
So Miller suggesting suspending it specifically for migrants, well, that immediately bumps up against a lot of established law and constitutional understanding.
It certainly does. Which brings us to the legal experts, like Professor Steve Vladek from Georgetown Law.
Right. What's the expert take on whether this suspension could actually happen the way Miller suggests?
Well, Vladek and many others emphasize that suspending habeas corpus isn't something the president can just do on their own.
Ah, okay. So it's not an executive order type of thing.
Generally, no. The Constitution does mention suspension being possible. In cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. But the power to actually make that suspension happen is widely understood to lie with Congress.
So Congress would have to approve it.
That's the standard interpretation. The president can't just unilaterally suspend a constitutionally protected right like this. There are checks and balances involved.
So when Miller says they're actively exploring legal means, maybe they're trying to build a case to convince Congress, or perhaps arguing the invasion threshold is already met, bypassing Congress.
That seems plausible, yes. They'd be looking for a legal justification, however controversial it might be. And, this whole situation gets another layer when you consider a comment President Trump made.
Oh, what was that?
It was during an interview, I think, on NBC's Meet the Press. He was asked about his duty to uphold the Constitution.
And his response?
He reportedly said he doesn't know if it's his duty because he's not a lawyer.
Wow. Okay. Saying that, especially the context of discussing something as fundamental as potentially suspending habeas corpus,
Yeah.
That definitely adds complexity, doesn't it?
It really does. It kind of highlights these very different ways of viewing the Constitution, its importance, and who has what obligations, particularly when things like immigration or security are involved.
So we've covered quite a bit. Cleese's reaction, Miller's proposal, the meaning of habeas corpus, the legal constraints. What are the main things you, the listener, should take away from all this?
Well, first, I think, is just how fundamental habeas corpus is. It's not just legal jargon. It's a core protection against unfair imprisonment built up over centuries.
Right, it's about ensuring the government have a valid reason to hold someone. Considering its suspension, especially for a specific group like migrants, is a really big deal with serious implications for due process.
Definitely. Historically, it's been suspended only in truly extreme circumstances, like the Civil War. Applying it to immigration is, well, it's legally contentious, to say the least.
Okay, second takeaway.
That there are clearly very different views on how constitutional rights apply, particularly around immigration and national security. Miller's use of the term invasion is key here.
He's using that specific constitutional language. Article 1, Section 9 allows suspension during invasion or rebellion. But does the current border situation legally qualify as an invasion in that sense?
Well, that's a huge point of debate, isn't it? Most legal scholars would likely argue no, that invasion in the constitutional context traditionally refers to something like an armed attack by another country, not migration flows, however challenging they might be.
Got it. So it's a specific legal argument being made, but one that's heavily disputed. What's the third point?
It's about power and checks and balances. The authority to suspend a right like habeas corpus isn't absolute. It's generally understood to rest with Congress, not the president alone.
So the idea that the executive could do it unilaterally is a pretty significant departure from how the system is generally understood to work.
Exactly. And finally, I think this whole episode, Cleese's tweet, Miller's comments, Trump's statement, it just really shows how sensitive these issues are.
Yeah, even just talking about limiting fundamental rights sparks really strong reactions and debate. It underlines how much importance people place on these constitutional protections.
It really does. And it throws that constant balancing act into sharp relief, the tension between security concerns and protecting individual liberties. This habeas corpus discussion is a perfect example of that ongoing tension.
So as we wrap up, here's something for you to think about. Given the centuries of history behind habeas corpus as this bulwark against arbitrary power, what are the potential long-term consequences of even entertaining its suspension in different contexts like this? What does it tell us about how our understanding of rights versus security might be shifting? Definitely food for thought. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down